everybody. We're the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Erin.
I'm Dr. Kristen.
And you are ever so very welcome to our tiny little corner of the internet, where today we're talking about Season 5 of The Crown, Episode 9, entitled Couple 31, which, TLDR, it's about the divorce of the Waleses. In a lot of painful, awkward, and unnecessary detail in the fashion only Peter Morgan can create. We have a lot of thoughts and feelings about a couple of particular things that happened in this episode, including the role of John Major in the divorce proceedings of Charles and Diana. The way that Diana behaved, the fabulously acted, if not painful to sit through, conversation in the kitchen of her apartment at Kensington Palace. All
Dominic
these things.
West, like, holy shit in that scene. The face work that man was doing.
He's still Dominic West pretending to be a slight version of Prince Charles, but he's a very good actor.
But in that man, like, I just was watching that as a slight diversion here, and I was just like, I would watch the two of them do divorce, these two actors, a million times before I'd watch Adam Driver and Scarlett Johansson do it again. Like, this is the marriage story I truly want.
This is the marriage story we wanted to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that is the guts of this story. It is told and interspersed throughout with a divorce courtroom, and we meet lots of other couples who are going through divorce, which was entirely depressing and unnecessary. I understand why people's relationships don't work out. I understand why people get divorced. I've been surrounded by divorce my whole life. Thanks, Peter Morgan. Is this like something you think you've discovered, divorce? And like now you need to teach us about it?
It was so weird.
Make it make sense. I don't care about random people and why they're getting divorced. I care about the story that you're telling.
And, like, it was interesting, too, because I thought, when he first did it, I was like, okay, is he trying to make sure that the people who aren't in the UK understand the entirely antiquated and ridiculous way you get a divorce in the UK? Like, are we trying? But then he didn't explain it. He didn't explain that you have to live apart for 2 years or it's not legally divorced. He didn't explain that, like, both sides have to consent financially in ways that no American state makes them do. Like, it is a weird system.
And that
divorce
you have to go through that, like, pre-court counseling.
You have to sit with a total stranger who has no therapeutic training and tell them why you're getting divorced.
And tell them why you're getting divorced. Yeah, but, like, he never said, like, any of that was mandatory. He just, like, showed people going through it. Yeah. Raw. So there's three things I think we should talk about in this episode. Diana and Charles, the Diana and Charles dance. I thought it was really interesting, this subplot of Camilla and the spin doctor that she ends up hiring, which is what happened in real life.
And also, especially in the claims from Harry that she is the one who called all of the paparazzi on the royal family once she entered it. That's one of his spare allegations.
Oh, burned. Kristen is the one of our partnership who is paying more attention. She is my filter. If you're a patron, hi patron, and you watched our Monarch moment from the last episode, you know that I will be Dr. Kristen's filter for the coronation. She is my filter for spare. Ooh, that is brutal. So I think we talk about Charles and Diana. We talk about Camilla and this idea of, like, rehabilitating Camilla and Charles, which I find fascinating. And then I want to scream about John Major's treatment in this episode, an entirely farcical and nonsensical and insulting representation of a prime minister. Those are the three things I want to talk about. But speaking of the Patreon, we should say over on our Patreon, if you are a patron or you would like to become one, links below. Our Monarch moment for this episode will be talking about one of the big themes of this season and how it is represented in this episode. The big theme being the clashes in the royal family as the world modernizes, as the world changes. And so how the monarchy does and does not adapt to modernization. One of the adaptations in which I believe Lizzie was dragged kicking and screaming, was allowing divorce of the heir and the future head of the state church of England. It was a big flippin' deal to agree to their divorce. So that's what we're going to talk about over on our Patreon after this video. So if you're interested in those thoughts and feelings, come back at us. All right, of those three things that I mentioned, what would you like to talk about first?
The one we're going to get on the most rabbit trails is John Major. So why don't we save that for the end?
Yeah, that one's just going to be me yelling. So, like, then people can tune out if they don't want to hear me yell about it.
I'd say let's do Camilla first. She's brief. And then let's talk about the kitchen.
Yeah, so we see in this episode that Camilla is meeting with this guy, Mark. And he is a real person. He was their private secretary, Charles's private secretary from 1997 to 2002. And he is the one that is by and large responsible for turning their image around with the British public, which if y'all don't know that happened, I mean, you can guess from the fallout of Panorama and their divorce and what happened leading up to and around Diana's death. Camilla was not a popular person at all. And it's remarkable. Was she the queen consort now?
Yeah, I think, and I would say that public opinion on her is neutral rather than positive.
I think it vacillates between the two. Yeah. She is not outright hated anymore. Which is quite a feat.
Like the princess of everyone's hearts.
But she is not beloved. No, but I think
but nor is she like booed in public like she used to be. Yeah. So
Right. And they did manage, I think, to tell the story that we all have come to accept now, that like they love each other very deeply and very genuinely, and they probably should have just been married this whole time. And I think, the British public, not necessarily known for its empathy and understanding.
I think they also just got tired of her. Like, she became old news really quickly because there was no scandal. Like, Charles and Camilla are boring AF. Like, there is no drama around them. There is like nothing, and there was always drama with other people. So I think she just became part of the furniture. The British love nobody more than somebody who is just part of the furniture.
Right, and that was like the great success story, was that she became part of the furniture. She was accepted. She wasn't controversial anymore. I mean, that happening around the time that William and Harry were in their 20s, and they found something new.
All sorts of choices.
They found lots of new things to put on tabloid covers, like the pictures of Kate doing a catwalk at a fashion show and Harry in the infamous Halloween costume. Like, they did find other things to be controversial about that Windsor family, those nutty little Windsors. But yeah, she settled into a piece of the furniture. So hat tip to Mark, because he did the Lord's work and he did a lot of heavy lifting. But I think that's a really interesting piece of this episode and piece of their story going forward, that she had to make the decision to like go for official acceptance, and he had to make that decision, and kind of the conversations around that Charles and Camilla had, and meeting with Mark to talk about it as well.
Yeah. He was boring, and he should have been married to somebody who was boring. And if Charles was the second born, he would have married Camilla. And like, on a human level, I feel incredibly sorry for both of them that they wasted so many years apart, and that, they could never quite get over it. I'm not a huge believer in love conquers all. Like, it's not like, love always wins, but it doesn't conquer all. And I don't know how to differentiate that out loud, but like, I think love always wins, but just having love in a marriage is not enough. Like, there's a lot of other stuff that has to go in there. But in their case, like, in a certain way, love did conquer all, but man, did it leave a lot of casualties. And like, it was a war. And like, I think I've told this story before. They're the only royals that I know anybody who has been in actual direct proximity to, besides the Queen. My husband has been in the room with them several times when they've done things in Northern Ireland where he was a staff member. And like he said, they seem very warm. They're very good at eye contact. They seem to actually give a shit. And in Camilla's credit, she has never misspoken about Northern Ireland or misspoken or like done anything negative towards Northern Ireland. She's actually arguably, with some of the decisions she's made, the person who forced Charles to pay attention to Northern Ireland in any way. So our kind of experience with her too is a little bit maybe different, because like I know people that were like, cool, Diana was super into saving landmines. They're like, she didn't give a toss about us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so like it's an interesting part of the province. But like I just like John came home that night from being in the same room with them, and he's like, she seems like a lovely grandma. Like she just like seems like a lovely, warm woman. And like they are bred for this kind of single dose friend interaction, you know, and all of that. So I'm really glad in a certain way for her as a human person that she did make that decision. She made it happen. Harry's accusations as to how it happened also line up with me of an image of somebody who has a whole lot of privilege and was denied power for a long time. So this is how people of privilege who have been denied the power that they believe is rightfully theirs behave.
Yeah.
And it was a ruthless, I believe she has been ruthless to maintain that piece of the furniture position.
Yeah, 100%. So I think they haven't done as great a job as showing like the complexity of Camilla in this season.
I miss Emerald Fennell's performance a lot.
Oh yeah, she's much more of a sympathetic character this season than she was the previous, like mostly sympathetic. But I think it's interesting to kind of flesh out some of those ideas. And like she says at one point, the first time she meets with Mark, she says, loving the Prince of Wales has cost me everything. Her life was very hard. I don't think she lost everything, but I can understand the sentiment behind that statement, and that it was a really difficult decision for her to make, which way she was going to go. And I think Charles knew that. And outside of, and the fact that it was happening at the same time as this really, really messy, ugly divorce.
Public as hell.
Like really, really, like, I don't know if Diana said some of the things that she says in this episode, like hurt people. She might have said horrible things. I'm sure they both did. But yeah, to have that be happening as well, and to know that like I have to make this decision if I'm transitioning into this life. I thought they did a good job of it in this episode. It'll be interesting to see how they wind down Charles and Camilla towards the end of the series. Because they don't really deal with it very much in episode 10 as much. So like the purview of next season, what does that arc look like for them? Will be interesting to see.
Yeah, because it's obviously going to deal with a post-Diana world. So, I mean, because again, like we said, what would make the most sense, it would be really crass to end the entire series with her death.
Oh my God, could you imagine?
I can't imagine that that's what they'll do. And the most interesting Elizabeth stories are how she navigates, and he already wrote a movie about this, how she navigates the public perception of the crown after Diana's death.
Yeah.
And in a certain way, how the firm rehabilitates itself and re-wins the trust of quite a lot of people. The story of like how the crown behaved while Diana was dating Dodi is like the least interesting part of the 90s. Right. So I'm really hoping that she dies in the timeline, either in between seasons or like 2 episodes, death is off screen, and then we kind of go. But
yeah,
I haven't heard that they've cast or signed an actress for Diana for season 6. That like Elizabeth Debicki's been up. Great. Like, I haven't heard any casting for season 6, if it's any different or anything else.
Me
so
neither.
There's a lot of ways to tell this story. And in terms of telling a soap opera. Peter Morgan's very good at that. So I'm sure it will be whatever it is.
Makes me nervous.
I mean, he's made me nervous for ever. So, speaking of, so, I mean, I remember too, so I actually, in between the last 2 times we filmed, I talked to my mom, who was a sentient human being, during all of this, and my mother reads the newspaper every single day. And if it was anything was reported about Charles and Diana in mainstream American press, my mother read it. And so we can talk all about the British tabloids all we want. There were leaks on both sides to mainstream American media. There were accusations all the time. Like, she remembers there was one whole story that even outside of Tampon Gate, there was a whole series of stories that people leaked about how Charles would move Camilla around the various houses and hide her from Diana, and how he paid, like, at one point there was a story that went around, which I am positive is not true, that he paid off the boys to keep it a secret, because, like, that is, but that was being said.
Yeah.
And, like, Diana, it was one of those where everybody could, my mom said that her memory of the American national sentiment at the time is that whatever was coming from somebody close to Diana was Diana through somebody else, and somebody close to Charles was just somebody in the firm.
Yeah.
And it was ugly stuff leaked from Diana's side, like ugly vindictive stuff. And so it was, but she, at the same time, it's really funny, my mom remembers totally taking Diana's side.
Yeah.
And like we pushed back on that a little bit and just had kind of a conversation about it. And she said some of it is because, like, my mom didn't see the Panorama interview, but she saw the clips that went on ABC. And she could identify, like, she could emotionally connect with the idea of being in the situation that Diana describes as being miserable.
Yeah.
And Charles is a prince, and in the 90s, we thought everyone who was royalty was just wonderful. Mm-hmm. We hadn't started talking about it as a human rights violation yet.
No. And I think it took us a long time, and we're still even struggling now to have honest conversations about what it does to people to live in that environment and with that worldview.
Yeah.
To see yourself that way. But I think that's I mean, we've already sort of started talking about Diana, but we can kind of add anything else we want to about the Charles and Diana of it all in this episode. And I know you want to talk about specifically that kitchen scene, which I wrote down as total fiction. And this is a conversation that Peter wishes that they had.
Yep, 100%.
Oh,
but it's also, to me, like, really endemic of actually what I think was happening. Yeah. Which is that in Charles's mind, he always tried to make this marriage work. Mm-hmm. And in Charles's mind, only rarely was he outright cruel. Only rarely did he do anything. And in his mind, this is a both and problem. And they could both come together. And in Diana's mind, this is all his fault.
Yeah, and I think it's similar in a way to some of the themes that they've unpacked about Elizabeth and Philip. Mm-hmm. And I think the almost, it seems like, impossibility at times, but certainly the difficulty of being married to the future monarch or the monarch. But, like, she says that line that's completely nonsense, that, like, I married you and not your family. Like, girl, you had the most watched televised wedding of all time. Like, you knew you were marrying a family. Don't bullshit a bullshitter. But, like, in that scene, it was also really evident that, like, obviously he always has and can never not think of himself as the future monarch, because that is what he has always been. Mm-hmm. And so he doesn't have the, like, luxury of that kind of cognitive dissonance. And he, we see him battle with that all the time. We see Elizabeth battle with that all the time. It's one of the most interesting things that this show does, I think, well at times. But I think that was one of the things that was really clear, was like she thought within their marriage he could make that dissonant break. And he was like, I don't think he knows that it's possible. And maybe the only time he's ever felt like himself, like Charles and not Charles Windsor, is with Camilla. And he already had that with her, and so he couldn't find that with Diana. I think that certainly, and she just wanted somebody to see her, as we talked about a lot in the previous episodes leading up to this one. And I think that's what made it so sad. And like, as like the way the scene played out, I thought, even though highly dramatized as it probably was really relatable. Kind of like the you know, we never sat down and made eggs together. And then by the end, it dissolves into like, they're two of the people that know how to hurt each other the most. And that's what their relationship had dissolved into and had been for years. And so that's what they defaulted to.
Yeah, I think I should say I've never had a terrible contentious breakup, and I've never been divorced. So but when my terrible friendships break up, my instinct is to never hurt the other person.
Yeah.
And so I don't, and even when I'm really mad at my husband, which I am not infrequently, I don't have that gene in me that says they need to suffer.
Yeah.
I understand that a lot of other people do.
Yeah.
And so like my instinct is just always so pragmatic. And it's always to try to get in some way people to see reason or to see logic. For some reason I am part like Spock, and I am not entirely sure why, but it seems to serve us well, like this Vulcan I have within me. But what got me is that what we know of them in their divorce is that they were excellent co-parents and really respectful co-parents. And now I'm really curious how long that took to put in place. Because that couple that sat there, I don't understand. Like, she fundamentally believes that being a good mother means she does not raise William to be the heir. And obviously, like, that's not on the table, chicken. So I don't know what you think is happening here.
Yeah.
And there's still a lot of delusion in her in that conversation of how much power she has. I mean, I think Camilla nails it on the head after the panorama. She thought she'd hold all the cards. Like we said that in the last episode, she had no concept that the world was going to turn on her. And that this many people were going to be really mad about it, because when you're in trauma, you don't make logical decisions. You just make, survival decisions. And so Panorama was about survival. I have no concept of how those two boys did not self-destruct at some point in their lives. And I am very curious as to which obviously we'll never know. If Charles releases his papers after he's dead, then maybe we'll get an insight. But, like, I would love to know the parenting negotiations. I really would. Because, again, like, that is what I remember around both weddings. And maybe that's the public line. I haven't read that chapter in Spare, so who knows? Maybe Harry will be like, no, they were actually terrible to each other our entire lives. That, like, they were great co-parents and they really cared about us is a total lie. I don't know. Because that's not one of the things that BuzzFeed told me I must know about the book Spare. So thankfully I know a lot about Harry's genitalia. Thank God. But I don't know a whole lot.
God.
Don't know a whole lot about parenting. The thing that got me about the scene, that they were completely intractable in their worldviews.
Yeah.
I was impressed that Charles just flat out said, I'm sorry, several times. He didn't ever try to justify it. He just said, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Which is not a choice Diana made. Though when she did apologize, she justified it as being a survival. But the look on Dominic West's face when he talks about the Panorama interview, it's going to go up there for me with the look on Emma Thompson's when she finds the necklace in Love Actually. Like, the physical embodiment of pain.
Of that pain. Yeah, man.
And I don't think it really occurred to me that it was that bad until Dominic West did that with his face. And I was like, girl, how dare you?
Yeah.
How dare you? And it also, so the other thing that kind of got me is that Diana keeps saying, I was in love with you. Here's what we know about their courtship. She might have been in love with the idea of him.
Yeah, she had no idea who he was. They showed us that after they got married.
She didn't know who he was. They didn't spend enough time together.
Absolutely not.
So her baby brain decided that she loved this man. And I understand that, like, you know, we can do the whole is love a choice conversation, blah, 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 blah. But I think that's part of the story she told herself, and it's not actually true. I'm not entirely sure she ever loved him. But, like, God damn it, did she have to hold to that story.
Oh, 100%.
And so it became true because of the reality. But it's like, you look at even her actions towards him. She didn't love him. She just needed to be loved by him. And those are two separate emotions.
Yeah,
Oof.
and I think in that scene you get glimpses of, and we've seen that the whole last, you know, all the seasons since they were married, so 3, 4, and 5 now, you've seen the way that, you know, Josh O'Connor and Dominic West have portrayed Charles as always the person that knows the only person who knows him and loves him and sees him as Camilla.
Like, Josh O'Connor was a dick last season. A lot.
Yeah.
Like, a lot. I'm not trying to be a Charles apologist here.
Absolutely not. Or, like, throw Diana, you know, under a bus, proverbially, for how she behaved. Like, we're just trying to understand these character motivations and people motivations.
And I appreciate that this show has complicated the narrative of Charles the monster and Diana the saint.
100%. Yeah, because, I do too.
Like, I mean, obviously you logically know that that's not true because humans are never, you know, that kind of thing.
One thing or the other, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is our, you know, their discussion. They called it an autopsy. That is our autopsy of the marriage of Charles and Diana, the Waleses. And, you know, we'll see where they go with that story into episode 10 and kind of how they wrap it up for that season with the three of them in that marriage and in that divorce. Even, you know, Camilla is still a real big part of what does and does not happen between the Waleses until Diana's death. So we will put a pin in that until we can see what happens in episode 10. Lastly, I just want to say about Prime Minister John Major in this episode. I have no idea why he was in this storyline at all. Totally unnecessary. And then infuriating to me that the show would suggest that the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland would visit the Queen to talk about the lawyers for her children's divorce. Would agree to be their mediator. Absolutely never happened. He's a, you know, prime ministers are kind of busy. I don't think he had, his wife was like trying to get him to take a break. And because he was spending all this time like helping them get through their divorce. No. And I won't yell at y'all because you don't need to hear it. Just know that I did yell a lot when I watched the episode. Then I yelled at my mom, and then I yelled over Slack to Dr. Kristen that the second time they mentioned Northern Ireland in this entire season was when the Queen was trying to convince him to be a mediator and says, "You've done such good work in Northern Ireland." And Kristen pointed out, hilariously so, that yes, they're both very difficult situations with intractable sides. Touché. I can see a lot of similarities, but also a lot of differences. And all of my notes were just in all caps after that. So, Johnny Lee Miller, I think, did a good job as John Major this season. He had really weird stuff to talk about. And, like, it's so interesting to me that, like, that man is known globally. Like, that man has a Nobel Peace Prize for the work he did in Northern Ireland. And that part of him was a throwaway sentence in this whole season. And everything else that he was in this season was like, nobody knows. Like, I don't know anything about John Major outside of Northern Ireland. Do you? Like, I don't know what kind of, like, domestic politician he was, or, like, what his economic policies were, or, like, how he talked about bus strikes. I don't know any of that stuff. So, like, it just... Peter Morgan's absolute insistence on avoiding and also misrepresenting Northern Ireland is admirable and also infuriating. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add to my short but still ranty rant.
I want to clarify. I want to confirm something that Aaron implied. There is no evidence at all that this happened.
Oh, no. He denied it. Like, that's one of the things John Major came out and said, like, absolutely not.
Yeah. So just to be clear, this isn't that, like, we know he didn't do it because, like, we've read all of his Nobel Peace Prize nonsense. Like, he literally didn't do it. So,
I
mean, like, it's, I don't know. And he did a ton of work, but, like, the person that, and I should, like, it's even more infuriating to me, I will say, because a lot of people that talk about Northern Ireland give all the credit to Tony Blair and Bill Clinton.
Right.
And, like, they did a great, they got it, they got the football over the finish line. Like, they made, like, you know, they kind of got us. John Major did so much. And it is a lot for people on that island to speak positively of a Tory. And, like, pretty universally they do about him. I think he truly was a diplomat. He truly understood negotiation. He truly understood, because the one thing I do like about that storyline is watching how he negotiated. I think that might be factual. I've heard people talk about being in the room with him, and it was he kind of took morality out of a lot of the things. He said things like, I'm just encouraging you to be flexible in your thinking. And in a way, those scenes are a masterclass in negotiation. And they were good television, absolute bullshit of historical record. But it was, yeah. You obviously found a reference in a book.
I was just looking at the Downing Street Declaration from 1993, which is arguably, like, one of the largest things the British government did. In terms of announcing that, like, the British government announcing that there was the right to national self-determination based on consent freely given, both North and South in Ireland, was a major concession by the British government.
Massive.
So, like, what prime ministers in the 90s were able to do leading up to Tony Blair were quite remarkable. And yeah, it's just...
Thatcher made everything worse. So it isn't even 100%. Like they were coming in on neutral. Like, they were coming in on massive deficit. And of all of them, I honestly think it was Major who got them to the point of neutrality. So that then Blair could come in and do more work. But, like, it is the amount of trust building that he did with the SDLP and John Hume in particular to get, and Martin McGuinness, and to get Republicans and nationalists to the table cannot be understated.
Yeah. And I think, like, it's just a shame to have, I think, missed a great opportunity to talk about a really interesting person who did a lot of good things in that aspect. As I said, I don't know anything else about his premiership. I would assume I didn't agree with him on a lot of things because he's a conservative and I tend to be more liberal-leaning. But, just even that, and to have him reduced to mediating bickering, vindictive, divorcing couples was just, like, insulting, frankly, to watch. And, like, at the end of the day, totally unnecessary. Like, what did we get out of that sequence of shots of John Major being involved in the episode? We say this now almost every time we talk about any television show, but specifically The Crown. Like, time is a finite resource. Why did you spend 15 minutes of this hour-long episode? I would ask Peter Morgan so many questions if I ever met him.
They would never allow us in the room with him. Like, ever.
Absolutely not.
Like, we are on a list somewhere.
Just looking at the line, "You've done such good work in Northern Ireland. Won't you help my son and his wife divorce amicably?" And, like, because it's honestly, insulting like, to Elizabeth that she would ask him to as well. Like,
I know. And, like, also, Northern Ireland wasn't resolved amicably. So, like, let's...
like, I know.
Especially not until 1998. So...
Yeah, like, 1996, we still had, like, yeah, he got ceasefires, but then the IRA broke their ceasefires. So this happened in, like, 96 into 97, their divorce and separation. Or, like, their divorce proceedings. Like, the IRA had broken their ceasefire. The Cannery Wharf bomb was in July of 1996. The IRA started bombing mainland England for the first time in 20 years. Like, So, like... At that point, we didn't even know he had done a good job in Northern Ireland because a lot of people thought it was all going to fall apart.
Because it did several times. I mean, for all that we talk about how messy that was, and, like, I mean, we would be the first people to line up and say that, like, there's a lot of real problems over there. The peace agreement of 1998 is one of the greatest political achievements of human history. Like,
the whole world. Yeah, the whole world.
Anyone who learns world history or conflict resolution in any way, shape, or form that does not know the names of John Hume, Jonathan Edwards, and Tony Blair is missing a damn trick. So, yeah. Anyway, rant over. We're done now. Our Monarch moment, you'll be delighted to know as Aaron, especially for those of you who are so tired of us talking about Northern Ireland. This one isn't about Northern Ireland. As Aaron said at the top of the show, we're going to be talking about the cultural normalization of divorce. Just a little bit of what that looked like differently from, it's a very generational thing, obviously, and what it meant in Britain. And a quick reminder that women weren't legally able to open their own credit cards until, like, the 90s in most places. So... there's a lot of reasons as to why it could start happening in the 90s, and we'll get into those on the Monarch moment, and we hope we see you then.
Bye, everybody.